Hello and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you to our annual George Liele lecture. A rather exciting topic, I must say, and we have the most able speaker ready to present the lecture this year. And I know for those of you who have joined us in other lectures, similar conversations, no doubt your questions are all lined up and you are just raring to go. But we are going to be going through some preliminaries, and at this time we are going to be welcoming Ms. Pamela White, and Ms. White will be sharing the opening prayer with us. For those of you who are having sound challenges, just as we're getting ready for the prayer, could you kindly probably log out and return? I only see just one concern. So I hope everyone else is hearing clearly and we are ready to go. Let us quiet our hearts as Ms. White lead us in prayer. Ms. White? All right, so I'm not hearing her. So let's just move on quickly. Let us go to God in prayer. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for the gift of today, and we thank you for the many ways you have guided us to this point. And now, oh Lord, we wait upon you to lead us in this session. We acknowledge that you are Lord, and we acknowledge that you have blessed us in so many ways. You have allowed us as a denomination and as a people who are called by your name to represent you and our faith in so many areas of this nation's life. And even now, God, as we come in this manner to reflect on Baptist work in electoral politics, or how Baptists have been serving, or how we have stood up or not as it relates to electoral politics, electoral representation, the governance of this nation. We ask that you will just open our hearts to hear you speak to us. We pray a special blessing upon our presenter, Dr. Wilmot, and we ask that you will allow him to share with us in ways that will not just help us to be informed, but to challenge us so that we might reflect on where we are today and what else you might be requesting of us. Lead us now, we pray, as we say thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. And now we will hear a word from Scripture. And this will be read by Mr. Dwayne Stewart, who will share from Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 40.
Good evening, everyone. The scripture reading, as was said, and it reads, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invited you in, or needing clothes and clothed you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Word of the Lord.
The Jamaica Baptist Union's Historical Society is particularly thrilled to host yet another George Liele lecture. And of course, another of these events online where we can include persons from various spheres of life and across the world who are able to join us. And so this evening, we are going to be receiving the statement of purpose, and this will be shared by our chairman of the Historical Society, Mr. Jeremy Taylor. Mr. Taylor?
More important here and see, and they crack the lens. See, over there.
Mr. Taylor, we're not seeing you.
That's quite okay. The lens may crack. Good afternoon, everyone. With the passage of the Emancipation Act and the end of the apprenticeship system, formerly enslaved persons became subjects of Her Britannic Majesty, supposedly with the rights of all dwellers in the shade of the empire, provided that men who owned a freehold, that is land, and paid a certain amount in taxes, they could exercise the franchise and elect members of the assembly who sat in Spanish Town and made laws. A frightening thought to an entrenched white minority who circled the wagons and, dare I say it, built a garrison to fend off the impending black tide. Our guest speaker, Dr. Swithin Wilmot, will be our guide through the thicket in this little known area of Jamaican history. The Jamaica Baptist Historical Society was established in 2003 following the Baptist Union Mission Conference held in Ocho Rios to ensure that the record of our witness does not vanish from the face of the earth. The aims and objectives of the Jamaica Baptist Historical Society are to research, document, and promote the history of Jamaican work and witness in Jamaica. The mission agency, through the society, has staged the annual George Liele Memorial Lecture, this being its 19th iteration, and held during October as part of our contribution to heritage-related activities. The lectures are intended to educate the Baptist community and the wider public on important aspects of Jamaican history and heritage, and also the contribution made by the Baptist Church in the development of Jamaica. We encourage our Baptist churches all over Jamaica to partner with the Society in the marking of Baptist historical sites, archiving and promoting Baptist history with activities such as these, and educating the nation on not only the seminal contribution made by the Baptist Church in the development of Jamaica, but also other aspects of Jamaican history. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Taylor. And we are now going to be blessed by a song, a recorded selection, Faith of Our Fathers. I urge the ladies to listen and hear clearly the recorded hymn. Yes, there are. Truly so. So we give thanks for the witness that has gone on before, and I believe that it stands as a challenge for those of us in the present. So now we are going to be hearing from our speaker, but before he comes to us, we will be receiving the introduction to hear a little bit more about him for those who do not know him or are familiar with his work. Ms. Epi Edwards will now bring us the introduction.
The Jamaica Baptist Historical Society is delighted to welcome Dr. Swithin Wilmot as our presenter. Sir, we thank you sincerely for accepting our invitation. I know you do not like lengthy introductions, so I will be as brief as possible. Dr. Wilmot is a distinguished historian. He's a retired senior lecturer in history and a former Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at UWI Mona. His research focus is on politics and society in post-emancipation Jamaica. Dr. Wilmot is currently preparing 2 manuscripts for publication. 1, a biography of George William Gordon, and number 2, Black Politics in Post-Slavery Jamaica. In June of this year, 2022, Dr. Wilmot delivered the Elsa Gavaya lecture entitled Seeds of Nationhood, Electoral Politics in Free Jamaica, 1830 to 1865. Do sit back and enjoy the presentation. Thank you for coming.
Your turn, Dr. Wilmot.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening. Good afternoon. I thank, first of all, the Jamaica Baptist Union Youth Fellowship Group for having invited me to deliver this lecture. It's been some time since I've been doing research which involve some of what I have to say this evening. And I'm very pleased at the opportunity of sharing some of my insights with the present-day Baptist Society and the efforts of the early missionaries in the immediate post-slavery period. I'd like to thank Ms. Epi Edwards. I knew her both at UWI and at the National Library of Jamaica, and I take the opportunity to thank Ms. Edwards and many others at the National Library who over the years have endured my presence, using their materials to try and delve further the various aspects of our history. As the lecture title suggests, Emancipation, Baptist and Electoral Politics, Emancipation to Crown Colony Government. We are looking at the period, the immediate post-slavery period. That initial opportunity when few men, because we must always bear in mind, the women couldn't vote, they had no public presence. It would take almost another century before they got the suffrage. So we're talking about men, and also more restricted by the fact that we're talking about men who had to acquire sufficient property to vote. So I don't want to give you the impression that we're talking about a mass politics in the broad sense of that term. But in the context of the time, we are talking about freedmen, former enslaved people, the elite among them, those with the means to purchase land, quite often artisans, carpenters, masons, coopers, blacksmiths, willing to participate and anxious to have a say in how the society was governed. The Baptists stand out, the white Baptists, the European Baptists, those who came after Liele and Moses Baker. In fact, we were invited here by Baker and Liele. We are talking about white European Baptists who in the last decade before emancipation had the difficult task of trying to steer between confronting slave society in an aggressive fashion and trying to spread their word among an enslaved population, enslaved by a very hostile plantocracy, hostile to freedom and hostile to the message of the gospel, which in its sense inherently threatened the very basis of slave society by talking about the universal brotherhood and sisterhood of people. The 1831 slave revolt in Western Jamaica, the Sam Sharp revolt, or it's called sometimes the Baptist War, speaks to enslaved people, many of whom were linked to the Baptist Church, who utilized the network of the Baptist missions in Western Jamaica to organize and to revolt and demand freedom. In reaction to that, the Colonial Church Union was launched, aimed essentially to purge the island of dangerous nonconformist missionaries and ideology. And in the aftermath, the backlash of destruction and threat to European missionary lives brought about a significant radicalization of Baptist ministers, especially William Liele was the most charismatic of the ministers. A radicalization which now meant that planters could never be trusted, and that the very mission required the destruction of slavery, and after that, a vigilance against any new forms of coercion and control. My late colleague and good friend, Robert Stewart, who published a book on religion in post-emancipation Jamaica, argued very convincingly that the Baptist ministers were voluntarists who lived off the support of their membership, developed a political theology whereby the missionaries had a moral imperative to involve themselves in secular matters so as to ensure that their membership enjoyed a standard of living in support, a standard of living which enabled them to support the religion of their choice. So the white Baptists were the first group in Free Jamaica after 1838 to mobilize the freed people around issues which pressed on their unrestricted enjoyment of their new status as citizens. Nick and other Baptist missionaries certainly, but he was the most outspoken, certainly borrowed ideas and methods of organization from the Birmingham radical Joseph Surge, with whom he worked closely after he had to leave the island in 1932 to bring about emancipation. And then Sturge kept very close links with the Baptists in terms of his efforts to terminate their apprenticeship system. And certainly after emancipation, Nib and others benefited from Sturge's mobilization of funds for free villages and for education. I should point out here that funds which came for free villages involved missionaries also collected money from the individuals who wanted to purchase the land. The villagers bought their own land, but through the Baptist missionaries who could buy the land in large sizes they had and then subdivided into plots which they purchased. The Baptist first involvement in electoral politics in this period, in fact, began as early as 1835, during their apprenticeship, before the freed people were in a position to participate. They were still apprentices. In that year, the governor, anxious to confront the planters who were being obstructionists in the assembly, decided to organize what he called a King's House party or a town party, which was based primarily on the newly enfranchised free people of color, that is, the people of mixed ancestry, and the free blacks and the Jews. The Baptist missionaries, we have evidence that especially Burchell and Nib, the missionaries also in Westmoreland and in Hanover, were very active in mobilizing members of their organizations who qualified for the franchise, free coloreds and free blacks, in backing candidates put up by the town party. In Trelawney, not only did they organize, but Nib voted, as did Burchell in St. James. In Trelawney, the candidate, local Creole white, Matthew Farquharson, won. In Trelawney, in St. James, the candidate there lost. But their involvement then convinced them further that come full freedom, crucial to their work and their vigilance was to ensure that the free people enjoy their political rights, especially where they needed these to protect the interests and the survival of their mission. Crucial to this, very early on, was the Baptist view of themselves as much as they believed in universal brotherhood. But the Baptists viewed themselves as teachers, as tutors, and they freed people as pupils to be taught, to be led, to be guided. In a cultural way, to be elevated in their view up the rungs of the ladder of civilization. It meant cultural change. It meant a certain whitening. It also meant a certain educating, a certain telling them, informing them, instructing them in their rights and their privileges as freed people. So there is an ironic aspect to all this, that whereas the Baptists were intent on demanding equality from the planters for their members, that they should be treated as equal citizens insofar as it could be equal. Under the law, they were equal, although women clearly were not equal. They did not enjoy civil rights in the same way that the men did. Even though they're demanding equality, they constructed a relationship of father and child as someone to guide, to lead, to instruct. And crucial to this relationship was the vision, the political vision associated with the free village movement. It is the people who moved to the free villages, they and others who acquired land in various settlements, who could qualify for the franchise, providing they knew about registration. And the Baptists from the very beginning, Nib particularly, Burchell as well, had a concept that the villages they created should in fact be of sufficient size in terms of lots, that those who purchased the land would also qualify for the vote. As early as November 1838, this is 3 months after full freedom, Nib wrote to Sturge seeking his financial backing for the establishment of villages, which he described as the only remedy to oppression, as it will enable the laborers to have a vote in the proper elections of the colony. as well as to make them independent and free. 2 weeks later, Nib purchased his first village at the site of where his first village was. He purchased, in fact, a coffee property, not near Falmouth, 20 miles to the north of Falmouth, in a district, in a mountainous district known as the Alps, near to the contemporary Ulster Spring. And there he established his first few village, which he named appropriately New Birmingham, although we commonly call it today the Alps. He explained his plans for this new settlement to Dr. John Hobie, the secretary of the Baptist Missionary Society. He wrote to Hobie, "My plan is to convey the house and a few acres of land to the mission and to resell the whole of the rest to the members of the Church of Christ who may be oppressed or who may wish to purchase. It shall be sold in lots of 1, 2, or 3 acres, so that on the erection of a house, the occupier may have a vote at the election." So from the very start for Nib, the Free Village movement was as much about refuge from oppression on the estates, also a site to keep the congregation together and to have influence over them through the church and the school. He saw the added dimension, political empowerment. And many of the Blacks who could grasp the opportunity for the chance to have a say as much as they could in how the society was governed. By 1842, Nib had established 5 other free villages in Trelawney: Granville, Hastings, Hobbytown, known to us today mainly as Sherwood Content, Kettering, and Refuge. And by 1844, he claimed, but you must always bear in mind that Nib was given to overstatement, especially when carried away on the platform. In that way, he was a very early Jamaican politician. He claimed by 1844 that his villages housed 400 new votes, which stood ready to influence the outcome of the election in Trelawney. And this wasn't, I mean, he boasted about this. And in fact, he threatened to plant an incumbent publicly in a Baptist chapel meeting that assembled there to discuss a memorial against the new admission on the same duty into the British market of foreign free-grown sugar. And the assembly member, Mr. Core, made the error of, while endorsing the memorial against this, to raise the point that as far as he was concerned, part of the crisis in the sugar industry in Jamaica was that the workers were lazy. Nib took strong exception to that and threatened that, look, at the next election, we have 400 votes who will deal with you unless you retract that and also retract your notion of immigration being required. As we shall see shortly, the governor's early election prevented Nib from showing us really how many votes he had. But certainly based on voters, then 4 or 5 years later, as we shall see shortly, the number was probably near to 200 and 400. So by 1842, Nib very clearly and other Baptist missionaries are intent on mobilizing the voters to the free village movement to impact elections. What I'm searching to share with you is that the first approach to mobilization were meetings. Meetings against laws which they thought were unjust, and meetings against the assembly in 1839, who had withdrawn their services over the Imperial Prisons Act because they thought it undermined their autonomy. Nib and other Baptist ministers throughout the island call meetings in their chapels, where they call, first of all, for the planters to respect the rights of workers as much as they wanted the British government to respect their political rights and to desist in their high rents and low wages and eviction of workers. And also that meeting, or those meetings, NIB called and other ministers called for the extension of the suffrage because the local planters could not be trusted to exercise the franchise. At those meetings, freed people spoke. And I suspect a lot of what they had to say, the fervor, the spirit, the directness of what they had to say, may enough embarrass the host missionaries. They're often called upon to speak, mainly the deacons, to speak in seconding resolutions, which are already prepared and drafted. But they took the opportunity to add their own words. And I'll just share with you, not often get a chance to hear what these people are saying for themselves, rather than what people are saying about them. The newspapers allow us to extract this information. They had strong words against the governor, who they thought had passed laws which restricted their options, approved laws of vagrancy and trespass, and laws which undermine their ability to have independent work off their estates, law to regulate peddling, laws to regulate fishing, which they all thought were meant to encourage them to remain as workers on the estates. In Green Island, the deacon at the Baptist gathering in Green Island in Hanover, referring to Metcalfe, said as follows: "I will not call him his excellency, but that man, if he no make public apology to we, let him look out. He better leave the island." In Falmouth, the deacon, one of NIB's deacons, reflecting on the accusation against the Baptists of being partisan to the workers. He accused the Anglican ministers of, quote, going from place to place, drinking punch with the bushers who sent them a leg of mutton. And that Governor Metcalfe's criticism of the Baptist missionaries had resulted because the governor had, quote, drunk too much of Master Turtle soup, end of quote. He then suggested, I think much to the unease of his host missionaries, that if the governor is a Church of England man, then he's not a Christian, end of quote. And as the resolutions were passed and criticisms increased against the governor, the assembled free people shouted, "Yes, make we send him away." This is 1840. Of course, these reports scandalized the Baptist Missionary Society at home, who criticized the missionaries for assembling such meetings, and for giving platforms for comments which undercut the governor's authority. Metcalfe was not amused, but kept his cool and reflected his displeasure by extending his munificence to the other religious groups, but extending nothing to the Baptists. He took it actually to a personal situation where on this island tour, in visiting Falmouth, he left contributions for the Methodists, for the Presbyterians, for the Anglicans, but nothing for the Baptists. The planters certainly took the position that this was further proof that the ministers' involvement with secular issues was because the fear of the rival spread of the other groups, that it was in their interest and support to stir up the Baptist workers so they will be able to contribute to the mission. What is clear is that after the rebuke from home, Sorry, I should mention that when Nib also visited England later that year, the colonial office refused to see him and asked that he put his complaints in writing. So they were shunned at the colonial office. They were rebuked by the missionary society at home and certainly attacked left, right, and center by the colored press and the planter press. It was then that Nib and others decided that come the next elections, June 1845, the way forward now was to organize the vote. That pressure from without was not going to bring about the desired results. And what was required now was pressure from within to get people in the assembly who share their views and who would be better able to put forward the interests of the freed people. In the interest of time, I'll quickly go through a timeline between 1842 and 1844. Crucially, in 1842, which helps to drive the campaign 2 years later, is that the Baptists in Jamaica, in the interest of getting the mission to Africa going, declared themselves financially independent of the Baptist Missionary Society. They chose in 1842 that they would live on the support of their members here. So any issues which arose, which threatened the economic survival of their members, by extension, threatened the mission. Also, by 1842, 1843 in England, was a growing campaign against church rates, which eventually meant that money was being used from the public taxes, as was in the Jamaican case, to support the established churches. There's growing protests or growing opposition. So there's a model in England, they're independent. And come 1843 and 1844, a series of all-island droughts creates greater difficulty. Wages are also decreased, and membership contributions begin to fall off. Even Nib, by June 1844, is complained that he stood the risk of losing teachers. We didn't have money anymore to employ. The schools would continue, but with inferior teachers. Other groups in Jamaica, especially the Congregationalists, those attached to the London Missionary Society, also came under pressure to finance themselves. And in 1844, they too joined the Baptists in resolving to petition the Assembly against the established church. What they were petitioned against was a long-established practice where in Jamaica, the Anglican Church was financed out of the public revenue. So taxpayers who were not members of the church were also called upon to contribute. And in fact, having to pay the public taxes at times of difficulty meant it was very difficult to find their funds for their own church. So the contributions began to decline. At the London Missionary Society, and 2 ministers linked with the United Secessionist Church of Scotland publicly proclaimed that the time had come to mount a campaign to join with the Baptists to fight against the established church, the financing of the established church, and also to get people in the assembly to decree, to affect the finances or the financing, whereby increasingly duties were put up on import duties. Import duties were being increased on staples, on flour, on rice, cornmeal, etc., consumed by the mass of people, in some cases by 150% between 1838 and 1844. In 1838, the planters were importing this stuff to feed their apprentices. In 1844, when the people have to feed themselves, the duties are increased and double in some cases on flour, on rice, on cornmeal, salted meats, and fish. Even the duties on shingles, which were being used to construct homes in the villages, were increased at the same time as the duties on lumber being used on the estates to make hogshead were decreased. So there is a growing interest in mounting a campaign. And in 1844, Jamaica, in May 1844, the Jamaica Anti-Church State Convention was formed. This is about 4 weeks after the British had formed their own. The essence of that convention was to bring together like-minded Baptist missionaries, missionaries of the London Missionary Society, and also 2 Presbyterians and 1 Methodist, Jamaican Methodist Association, which was independent from the European Methodist Group. 19 missionaries in all agreed to campaign together to bring about the disestablishment of the Anglican Church. The usual Clergy Act, Septennial Act, was due to expire in 1845, and a new assembly was also due to be elected then. And the idea was to get as many people into the assembly who could influence that decision. The Baptist greatest strength was in the West, the Baptist Western Union. Of course, they had a presence in the main towns on the southeast, in Spanish Town, in Kingston, and in Port Royal. But the Congregationalists had established missions across Clarendon and Manchester. And also they had a mission in St. Thomas in the east. So in many ways, they complemented the Baptists in terms of spatial influence. Certainly immediately between May and August, the groups pushed registration. It was known to arrive in Spanish Town at the end of May with 150 titles to register. You had to bring them to Kingston, get them stamped, and then record them in the Island Secretary's office in Spanish Town. These were people claiming the right to vote. William Barrett, who was the chief spokesperson for the Congregational Church, he too was seen coming to Spanish Town with over 50 electors in Clarendon to register. These numbers may seem small to you, but in the previous election in Clarendon, less than 30 people voted. 50, if it happened, would have been a significant difference. They also met in Kingston in the East Queen Street Baptist Church on August 23rd, 1844. That was Samuel Otis Church in Kingston. The Congregationalists and they met there for what they call an island-wide meeting of the voluntarists. And at that meeting, both Barrett and Nibble took the issue to a higher level. They moved from strictly voting to talking about a general strike, of mobilizing workers around a general strike if the assembly went ahead with new talks of immigration, East Indian immigration. They already brought in Africans, Europeans had come. There was no greater interest in East Indian immigration. And Nibble and Barrett threatened a general strike if that was brought in. In addition, so the convention was now talking not only in terms of political change, but also broader class action across the island. Within 3 days of that meeting, the governor used his prerogative to bring the election forward, essentially to call a snap election, which made all the efforts of the voluntaries of the convention, which negated their efforts. The regulations required 150 voters who would have registered in May at the office. Under the regulation, you had to have been registered for 12 months before you could exercise the franchise. So they would not be able to vote before May 1845. The elections were expected in September 1845, if that gone along the usual 7-year period. What the governor did was to bring the election forward early by a year, which was his prerogative. A snap election. Those of us in contemporary times who know we had one such in 1983. NABE and others were totally unprepared. They undercut their campaign. And when the elections were held, 4 candidates connected to the voluntaries campaign, to the convention's campaign, contested elections. Only one was successful. One of the losing candidates, the one who succeeded, was chairman of the convention, who had a long history, Dr. Palmer, of being anti-slavery, who left England, was a stipendary magistrate and was fired and removed by the governor because he did not administer the system with sufficient strong measures to enforce labor. He, as one critic said, he administered the system as the full freedom had come. He had been active with Sturge himself. And he won the parish where he had been a stipendary magistrate. So while the Baptists did support him, those who were registered in time did support him. Baptists from Sligoville, from Victoria, and from 1 or 2 other settlements, all at Jubilee Town, Lucky Valley, settlements under Baptist influence, while they supported Palmer. Palmer won not only because of their vote, but because Anglican and Methodist freed people were expressing their gratitude to him for his defense and protection during the period when he was stipendary magistrate. Edward Vickers, who was a leading Black politician, Black as distinct from free colored, also contested the election in 3 parishes with Baptist support and lost in all 3. Even in Kingston, there was the unusual sight of the white European missionary at the hustings urging voters to vote for Vickers, the Black man. But the point is, the majority of Blacks in Kingston at the time who had the vote were either Anglican or Methodist and voted in their congregation. Clearly, religion or church affiliation provided social linkages, which went beyond class and color. So the 1844 attempt failed, essentially. And the Assembly's reaction was very clear. They brought forward 2 members, one William Addison, who was a Scottish solicitor, who had come here first as a protector of slaves, who was dismissed and ridiculed as a so-called Baptist lawyer, but who also opposed this establishment. And the second person was James Taylor, a long-term free-colored member of the House. Both together brought forward a bill which renewed the support for the Anglican Church, not only by 7 years now, but by 14 years, to put the issue to rest as far as they were concerned. The message was clear: despite petitions, we are not changing our position. Shortly thereafter, Nib died. In 1846, Burchell left Jamaica for the last time, was ill. He died shortly after abroad. But what I want to look at now are 2 instances where we have an idea of what could have been in 1844, had the election been held at the usual time and the Baptists had a chance to vote. I want to share with you two election periods, two examples of elections between 1849 and 1852. 1849 was the next general election in the parishes of Trelawney and in St. James. Try to speed this up as much I can, but it's hard sometimes to cut the story short. Certainly in St. James in 1849, the planters brought forward Henry Groves, a former overseer who was now a planter, who during the apprenticeship system was known for strong measures against his workers and also after, but also known for his dislike for free colors. But they brought him forward as their candidate against one of the incumbents, a colored merchant, but a merchant in Kingston, who had run for the seat in St. James in 1844. Mr. Brown was his name, literally, a brown man, John Samuel Brown. Brown took no chances. He thought the challenge was real and in fact ran in another parish for a seat. In those days, elections were held on different days in different parishes. They lasted almost 3 weeks. That was to give individuals with property in various parishes an opportunity to vote. He ran and won before, but the Baptists in St. James decided they still wanted Brown, or more importantly, they did not want Groves at any cost. And they were mobilized by a Baptist deacon, unusual biography, a deacon by the name of Israel Levy Lewin, clearly a Jew who had converted. Lewin had gone to Montego Bay to do business in 1824, but very early on was obviously drawn to Christianity. He supported Burchell in the early days. Burchell held his services in Lewin's home before he built his chapel. When the chapel was destroyed by the Colonial Church Union and Burchell left the island for his safety, his deacon conducted the service again in Lewin's home. Lewin was very close to the Baptists. He certainly lost any support from the planters, commercial support from the planters, and certainly his Jewish colleagues saw him as a literal turncoat. But throughout the period, Lewin continued his activity. He was who mobilized the support in Montego Bay in 1835 to try to elect Osborne for the town party. He failed. Himself had been elected a vestryman by free colors and free blacks. During the apprenticeship, he had refused appointment as a stipendiary magistrate because he was conscientiously opposed to the apprenticeship. And when he was appointed magistrate in 1838, he became known as a People's Esquire because of his strong stance against planter oppression and eviction. He had run-ins with Groves. And it was his mobilization across the parish through the Baptist network and in Baptist chapels which determined that election. On the day of election, Groves was defeated by John S. Brown. Brown received 140 votes to Groves's 70. So he doubled his votes. If we do a breakdown, as far as the records will allow us to look at the church affiliation of these voters, 57 people whose record suggests were Anglican voted in the election. 43 voted for Groves at 75%, and 14 for Brown. That's 25%. 59 Baptists voted in the election, from what the records can tell us, at least 59 Baptists. And 100% voted for Brown, not one for Groves. Who were these Baptists and where they were located? Of course, the two Baptist ministers were among the 59. 16 of these came from the Mount Carey church, which Burchell had built near to Montpelier. 3 of them lived in the Mount Carey village, one a mason, one a carpenter, and one who was formerly enslaved on Chillimas Estate. The remaining 13 votes from Mount Carey came from settlements surrounding the Montpelier area: Anchovy, Bickersteth, Cambridge, Comfort Hall, Duckett's, Unity, and York. And 5 came from the new village at Comfort Hall. Also voting from that group was George Miller, teacher, who had 2 acres at Foster Grove, which he called Save Rent. And also involved was Mr. Thomas Bernard, a leader in the Montego Bay Baptist Church, who resided at Comfort, the new village at Comfort Village, the south of Roehampton Estate. And no doubt this teacher and this class leader were very important in mobilization of the vote. In all, 19 people from that district of Montpelier voted for Brown against Groves. And the point is, Groves owned 3 properties, Belvedere Estate and 2 others, in that same area. So what the franchise had done and the mobilization had done, that individuals on the ground had outvoted the big massa in the area. Clearly, the significance was there, where freedmen, if they were mobilized, were able to assert a political position which certainly challenged what it had been before. If you look at the other major Baptist church in rural St. James, the Salters Hill Church, 25 voters came from Salters Hill. 6 came from Malden, where there's a free village, who had traveled 17 miles from Malden to Montego Bay to cast their vote. 19 others owned settlements scattered around the Salters Hill area: Johns Hall, Endeavour, Lation, Paisley, etc., Potosi, Springmount. I want to mention 4 individuals who stand out among these 25, which gives you an idea of the composition of the electorate. 2 were former slaves: William Smith, a blacksmith, who had been enslaved on Virgin Valley Estate and owned a freehold at Lation, which he called, not surprisingly, Happy Land. The second one was Francis Monroe, a carpenter, who was a headman on Paisley Estate during the apprenticeship, but left shortly after and bought land at the Sudbury settlement because of oppressive rents and low wages. Both were featured speakers in 1842 at the workers' meeting at Salters Hill, and obviously occupied positions of influence and leadership among the community. A third is Henry Hunter, a colored blacksmith who managed Lation from during the apprenticeship, and was a strong financial supporter of the Baptists at Salters Hill. And the fourth was William Melville, a free black teacher at Sudbury School, part of the network of Salters Hill. Clearly, freedmen, free blacks, free colors comprise the voting base in the rural areas of the circuits of the Baptist Church in St. James at Salters Hill. Suffice to say that the 70 voters who voted for Groves in 1848 paid a total in taxes, this is personal taxes, not land taxes, of £475, 70 voters. The 140 voters for Groves paid a total of £150 in taxes in the same year. It's clear if the people in rural St. James in 1849 stood up, organized by Liele through the Baptist network, and announced their arrival on the political scene. Many of these would have been the very ones who Burchell had registered before 1844 and who had been denied the opportunity to vote because of the snap election. Yet, after 1850, this sort of influence diminishes. It's not sustained. There are possible explanations for this, some harder than others. One, that the cholera epidemic, followed by an outbreak of smallpox in the early 1850s, affected the size and morale of the Baptist communities in rural St. James. Secondly, Lewin's death in 1855 certainly deprived them of bold leadership. Thirdly, as income and property values declined, the crisis, the free trade crisis of the 1850s, the Reverend Hewitt, who now was in charge at Mount Carey, in the 1840s, he was at St. Thomas in the Vale and very active in the convention campaign. He declared that he was now adopting a more conciliatory position regarding the planters. He said he was a voluntarist. His members lived off work and estates, and he wanted a more accommodations relationship with planters. It's part of his survival. Another reason, too, is that the Baptist community in St. James split. Is one of three significant divisions in the period, contests over property and ownership, which divided the unity which made the 1849 victory possible. The two other splits were in Spanish Town and in Kingston, 1840s, 1850s. Also, as more and more freedmen, if you look at the tax rolls, petition for tax relief because of poverty or distress. They lost the franchise, which was even put even beyond their reach by the additional stamp tax of 1858, which what, as a Baptist minister said, was meant to shut their mouths, quotes unquote. So given these factors, decline in numbers, decline in voting ability, poverty, hardship, a different tone of leadership, Mr. Groves finally won his seat in 1861 in the Jamaican Assembly and without opposition. And there he served until 1865, where it was abolished. Moving quickly along, as quickly as I can go, the second instance takes us back to Trelawney, where Nib had passed away in 1855. But the Reverend John Henderson, who had worked very closely with Nib from 1841 at the Waldenser Baptist Church, Sherwood Content today, he certainly believed, shared Nib's view of politics as a moral imperative to protect the work of the church. And he continued after Nib in mobilizing support in Trelawney. In 1846, he aimed at the vestry. There were 10 vestrymen, and the so-called Baptist Party, led by Henderson, elected 7 of those 10 vestrymen, including Nib's cousin, the Reverend Dexter, who was the other minister in the Rio Bueno area. Also, Edward Nib, who was Nib's nephew, who was a shopkeeper in Falmouth. And for our purposes, most importantly, at that time, a member of the Baptist Party was a Jewish retailer, George Lyons, who also was elected vestryman. The truth is, the planters were caught unawares in the election, weren't prepared, the people hadn't come out to vote, but still were able to block attempts to cut grants for the church or to cut taxes, because sitting on the vestry ex officio were magistrates. And there were at least 15 or 16 magistrates attending each meeting to outvote the 7. By 1848, the Henderson gives up the game, says no, he's not running anymore. Also, they had proved that one of the people chosen, a teacher, a Reverend Picton, wasn't sufficiently qualified. And Lyons had gone to visit England. So in 1848, they abandoned the vestry. In 1849, however, come a general election, the same election which Brown won in St. James. Henderson brings forward a Baptist ticket. He mobilizes Baptist voters, and he brings forward 2 people to challenge the incumbent planters and a Jewish merchant who are seeking re-election. One of the 2 people was George Lyons. Now, Lyons is crucial. Quickly, Lyons came from humble background. His father was a tailor. He became a retailer first with a colored partner, then went on his own as a purveyor of provisions and dry goods. And by the 1850s, they established retail outlets in all the Baptist villages in the parish. He was well known to the Baptist villagers and well known too because of his public profile at Baptist meetings, speaking against immigration, speaking against taxation. In fact, prior to the 1849 election, he had challenged another Jewish member, another Jewish merchant, the mercantile Jewish community, in small Jewish community, but influential Jewish community in Falmouth, had very little to do with Lyons because he campaigned for disestablishment, and their view was that that wasn't their business. They kept out of that particular matter. He challenged at the last minute. Lyons challenged Montague Salmon, who was running for the post of coroner. And even though other villagers had pledged to support Salmon, Lyons campaigned using the Baptist churches, even speaking after Sabbath services, to mobilize support against Montague Salmon, and won. So when he came into the election, he had already made a point about supporting the Baptist villages. In the 1849 election, Lyons received 105 votes, which was insufficient against the incumbents' 150. The planters, the merchants, professionals, urban artisans had defeated him. But Henderson had nominated him, and the nomination was seconded by Samuel Barrett, a cooper, a former enslaved cooper on Oxford Estate, who had moved to Kettering, one of the free villages. And in fact, he was obviously one of the better off people in Kettering because he owned 4 lots. He seconded. And even though Lyons lost, his performance tells you something about the support. Of his 105 supporters, at least 75, that is 79%. So at least 75%, 79 of them came either from Baptist villages or from settlements elsewhere in northern Trelawney, mainly between the fringes of the cockpit, between Kinloss and Hamden area, running along that area. So Lyons lost. Henderson, a by-election, arose in 1850. And this time, Henderson had another candidate, not Lyons. But Lyons would not stand down. But what we see here is a case of the children now becoming adults and not being tutored and directed exclusively by the Baptist minister. Lyons had obviously courted sufficient support. Sufficient of them thought he was their man. Henderson brought in a William Smith, who was a merchant, progressive merchant who supported free trade, was in England, returned to Jamaica 1840s, was a heavy investor in the railway company. Henderson argued that Smith was a better candidate, better experienced, superior educated to Lyons. The Baptist villagers, sufficient of them, believed that Lyons was their man nonetheless. On the day of the election, Smith received 149 votes, and Lyons 148. Henderson had linked with the traditional conservatives in the form of the Keep Out Lyons. It may have been in that period the first and only time that the Baptist minister, the Anglican minister, and the Methodist minister voted the same way. Costello, a Brown former link with the Baptists, who broke with them over this establishment, he mobilized the planters and the mercantile elite as well. So in a very close election, Lyons was defeated. But let us look at Lyons' support. Very clear, he had declared his independence now of Henderson. Smith's victory by 1 vote owed substantially to Henderson's ability as the pastor of the Hobbiton Church, the Waldenser Church, to make sure that of the 43 voters from that community, from that free village, 39 voted for Smith, only 4 for Lyons. But Henderson didn't enjoy the sort of prestige or influence of Neil before him, because out of Kettering, Lyons countered that because he won 37 votes in Kettering and Smith got 1. Clearly, people in Kettering weren't following what the Baptist minister was saying. In addition, let us look at the first time people who clearly Lyons had mobilized. People who have been in the list who had not voted in 49, who had registered before. They could not have registered between the time the general election, the by-election voted. But he was able, Lyons was able, he came that close because 78% of the 51 first-time voters from small settlements, including Baptist villages, he got the vote, the support of them, 78%. And amazingly, 2 of the first-time voters, Mr. Edward Cohal, who called his freehold Liberty Valley, and Robert Campbell, a carpenter, came from the Alps. That village had traveled 20 miles from the Alps to Falmouth to vote. That speaks of the support for Lyons and also his organizational outreach. So clearly by 1850, Lyons had outgrown Henderson's sponsorship and was now on his own. Henderson, by this time, was complaining that he was losing faith in his congregation, complaining about the decline in support. And by 1852, he moved to St. James. In December that year, Lyons ran for another by-election in Trelawney and made a spectacular victory. He contested the Costas, Henry Shirley, Cambridge educated, who the governor said was one of the most intelligent proprietors, who had inherited 3 proper estates from his father and these 2 more, which meant that he owned 5,000 acres in Trelawney in sugar. Lyons support. And it's not surprising, the support, because in the 2-year period between the elections, Lyons began a newspaper called the Trelawney. Unfortunately, despite years of searching, I've never been able to put my hands on an actual copy of one of these newspapers. But the other newspapers reported what they were saying, usually in a dismissive way, but it gives the idea of what Lyons was pushing for. He demanded the idea of cheaper food and cheaper wages. He wooed the headmen and the artisans in the parish by endorsing their protests against the reduction of their wages in 1852. He was among the first to call for compulsory education on the island. He even went further and said that the Blacks so valued the franchise so much that they should make literacy a condition for voting. They would send the children to school. And fourthly, and so I want to reference I've seen to this, and I wish I could have seen greater detail to this. He called for the subdivision of abandoned estates so persons could get access to lands. Even today's debate in Jamaica, that's an old story, which is not going away tomorrow. He also chaired meetings in Falmouth, which demanded the abolition of slavery in Cuba and the United States. Quickly, in the by-election, Lyons received 98 votes to Shirley's 45. Shirley had the undivided support of other planters, except for one who voted for Lyons. Lyons' support came from the villages. 42 of his voters, we have so far been able to identify, owned freeholds in one of the Baptist free villages: Clarkstown, Granville, Hastings, Hobbiton, and so on. 62 of his voters in total, that is 17 more than what Shirley got, owned land between 1 and 5 acres. Shirley's 45 supporters paid land taxes totaling £4,500. 97 of Lyons supporters paid a total of £228 in land taxes, which, by the way, those 97 people paid land tax, which is only half of what Shirley himself paid. So very clear, as in 49, as in St. James before, the bedrock of Lyons' support came from the poor slavery settlements in rural Jamaica, including the Baptist villages. As, unfortunately, time is on there, but as happened in St. James, the momentum wasn't kept up. By 1856, Lyons was bankrupt and had to give up his seat, and in fact was replaced by a planter, an extensive attorney. And until 1865, the representation in Trelawney was shared by the planters and by one of 3 Jewish merchants in Trelawney linked to the estates, not retailers. These are mortgagees, creditors, and planters in their own rights. Sufficient to say, come the 1858 reform of the franchise, putting a duty on the stamp duty, on the exercise of the franchise, you find that the numbers declined dramatically. In that by-election in 1850, nearly 300 people voted, 297 voted. In the election in 1833, it wasn't a competitive election, but the 2 people were returned by 33 votes. In fact, the Jewish merchant who won, Robert Nunes, was shortly thereafter appointed custos of the parish, commenting on the way in which the Jewish mercantile planter class had moved from the counting house to chief magistrates. Lyons and others like him who won in the period were not in that class. They were retailers linked with the small settlers. Lyons, I should mention, was one of 6 Jewish retailers to be sent to the assembly by such voters. So for a variety of reasons, momentum is not kept up. And more so by the 1860s, people like Henderson and Samuel Orton Kingston, who have been very active in the 1840s in promoting the vote, in seeing it as part of their moral imperative to influence the goings of the assembly, had lost confidence in the people's ability to choose because they were no longer doing as they were told. The students have become adults. And in the 1860s, both reverends pushed and welcomed Crown government. They did not trust the planters and they did not trust the people. And therefore the solution was the mother country, the governor, was to supply support. So we have been through a trajectory of total trust promotion, but then the adults grew up too quickly and the Baptist ministers retreated into conservative positions of the people not being able to govern themselves. Thank you very much.
Whew. Wow. I wonder if everybody feels like me, like you just want another mug of tea and just draw up a little closer for more of this. Thank you so very much, Dr. Wilmot. Boy, I know that the questions are coming, but let me just give you some directions. We are asking you that if you have a question or an observation or comment, we're asking you please to keep it short and, concise so that we can allow more persons to speak. Please raise your hands. We have disabled the unmute feature, so just raise your hands and use the raise hand feature for those who don't know what that means, because I might not see you raising your hand on the camera. Use the raise hand feature on the reactions at the foot of your screen there, and we will take your question. I will acknowledge you, and then we will take your question. I know that way into the conversation, Lena Davy had her hand up, so we will take her first. And then the others of you can post your questions in the chat. The chats are being moderated here on Zoom and on YouTube. We have moderators looking at your questions and will pass those on to me. But let me see, Lena Davy, if your hand is still raised, I'm going to ask the moderator to allow Lena to speak. Mr. Moderator. All right, where's my chat people? All right, I'm not getting an indication that Lena is still there. So I am going to move on to passcode 65815. Passcode. Someone has entered the chat as passcode 65815. I saw that raised hand. Please speak, and then I will take Joan Mars, followed by Dwight Fraser. Passcode? JB, could you unmute passcode if passcode is still present? If not, then go to Joan for me, Joan Mars. Passcode is still there? Not
yeah,
connected. All right, Joan.
I'm here. Just a clarification. There was somehow an understanding by me, maybe false, that the first free village was somewhere in St. Catherine. Is this presentation saying otherwise? I mean, I'm from Trelawney, so I would be ecstatic. Where was the first free village?
No, you're quite correct. Sligoville was the first Baptist founded free village, founded from during their apprenticeship, in fact. what I said first in my text, what I meant, what I thought I said, was the first one NAPE founded.
Oh, name. Okay, okay.
It was 1839. So Sligoville is still the first free village.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so very much for that. Reverend Dwight Fraser, we'll take your question.
Dr. Wilmot, is it your judgment that we are still in retreat? And if so, what would you say are the factors that we need to take into consideration on the way out?
Let me hear your question well. Is it my judgment that we are still in retreat? And we meaning Baptist ministers of the people. We talking about, sir.
I meant both ministers and people.
Oh.
I'm not sure I agree that the people retreat, but go ahead, Doctor.
It's a question. It's a question. It's not an answer.
I hear the subtext of your question, is that when am I going to declare myself the founder of a new political party?
Not really.
Okay, all right, okay. No, I don't think the people are in retreat. I'm not going to comment on the Baptist ministers. They're my hosts. And I don't know enough about I don't know enough about what they're doing to comment. I'm sure they're doing fine work like other ministers are in trying and challenging circumstances. But I don't think the people are in retreat at all. The people may be in retreat from officialdom, but not in consciousness. The sort of enthusiasm we saw before in national politics, formal politics, party politics, clearly based on the last election, where, if I remember correctly, 39% voted of the possible electorate. That is a comment. So, I mean, and I know the incumbent government must be concerned that despite winning a landslide victory, that 60% did not vote. Not that we're accustomed to high, a turnout in the 50s and 60s, yes. But I don't think the people are in retreat. I don't think they're less conscious. They may be more cynical. And I think with the proper circumstance and opportunity, they will speak.
Dr. Wilmot, let me follow. Let me follow up on that to say, in your presentation, a couple of things that struck me. One of them was the emphasis that the Baptists developed a kind of a political theology and espoused an understanding of a moral imperative to be so directly involved. We see the issues that stood out as though there was consensus and a passion, between pastor and people, missionaries and people around education, taxes, suffrage, wages, immigration. These issues stood out. So they were there and we could see them clearly. However, somewhere along the line, due to several factors that you mentioned, we understand now that a more conciliatory approach appeared to be taken, at least in one instance was cited. I'm hearing this as a Baptist minister, and I'm hearing this, I've heard this in contemporary times, that when people began to push in the Jamaican public space, what is the church doing? You know those phrases. What is the church doing? Why is the church more active? Which is convenient sometimes, but other times the church is told to sit out of this political discussion. That's not your business. Go preach. The question is, we hear some of our leaders say, we are involved, but we're taking a more conciliatory approach. And we are wondering if the people then feel as though we are no longer carrying on this moral imperative. We no longer have a political theology. The church is missing and absent because things are happening behind the scenes. That's what we're hearing. So we're wondering if from what you have seen, from the trajectory, if you could understand what we are trying to say without the subtext, do you think that something has shifted? And is it progressive or not?
Yeah.
I mean, if we survey the last 3 or 4 decades, there are periods when churchmen or church people, because there are women now who are also ministers, take strong public positions on issues. There are times when you wish you would hear more. There are times, I'll speak for myself personally, that I would want to take a public position, but I'm not prepared to be exhausted by the trying to keep up with the abuse and but then I'm not in my profession doesn't require me anymore to take public positions. As to what church people can do, there's no shortage of issues where I think in contemporary Jamaica, if there is one institution in Jamaica with the potential for national unity and development, there's the church in the broadest sense, rather than denominational groups. Our parties, unfortunately, are 2 tribes. Okay, and you're rewarded if you're a member, and you're punished if you're not a member. And the tribes will grow if incentives are there to join. The church has a potential, but they too have to deal with their divisions.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, divisions and issues which run the whole spectrum.
All right. Thank
I
you.
mean, some might want to hear, for instance, a strong position on an issue like education.
Yes.
Okay. Can the churches come up with a common position on education? Especially that sort of topic. That's an area where they have perhaps contributed the most and continue to contribute the most to this country in terms of the institutional development for education, primary school, right up to teachers' college.
Thank you so very much, Doc. All right, so we're going to be taking Coromanti Norris, and he'll be followed by Reverend Peter Escoot. Coromanti? Norris?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Wilmot for that enlightening presentation. Now, following from it, a quick question. In light of the
7590.
In light of the issue of land, the issue of homelessness, the issue of lack of title for people, and the pressures which is coming from, say, government, in terms of saying that if you don't want to have a title for your land, you shouldn't be landed and so on. Which and it's been a historical situation. Because I remember in the 70s, it was attempted by the Mandela government to try give title to people who were said landless peasants coming upward. So the question is this: what role is the Jamaica Baptist Union or the churches going to play as institution in terms of taking an activist support for the landless people, for the people who need to be supported by large institutions such as this, to have their social rights protected against legalism of a state system which is not protecting the rights of the poor class of people?
Thank you so much, Coromanti. Dr. Wilmot?
Yes, I've heard the question. I'm going to give both a historical or contemporary answer. I know times are different, but you mentioned the social rights of the people who don't have titles. I hear you, but what of the social rights of those who have titles? I'm able to say what I say about the free villages because they had titles, which were registered. No, I'm not suggesting that people have access to resources to acquire. And there is probably, there is a need for some policies to be articulated as to how to regularize people who have been on land for an extended period of time, especially people with extensive tracts of land who have not used them for years. But you see, you're asking me, we are confined and restricted by our system of land ownership. And clearly there's a growing collision with people's needs and availability. And I agree with you, not just the Jamaica Baptist Union, but the churches can, I think, adopt some position before the situation becomes overheated. I mean, as a historian, I don't make predictions. However, you're reminded of past things. And the land, Morant Bay.
Yes, sir. Next up, Reverend Espeut, and then John Mars. After Reverend Espeut, let's hear your question. And then I'll take some comments from the chat. Reverend Espeut.
Thank you, Chair. Swithin, excellent presentation as usual. I'm noticing the title is From Emancipation to Crown Colony. Didn't hear a lot about the Crown Colony part. I'm wondering whether, in fact, the Baptist Free Village movement partnered with the voter registration process cannot take credit for the House of Assembly voting itself out of existence. Because my understanding is that the House of Assembly decided to vote itself out because too many Black people had the vote and they were afraid that the House of Assembly would turn Black. And so rather than that happening, they voted themselves out of existence and had direct rule from Whitehall. Would you say that the Baptists of Jamaica can claim credit, the Free Village movement, the voter registration movement can claim credit for causing the House of Assembly to vote itself out of existence? And you say you remember the past. If right now we have less than 30% people voting, should the church come forward again and decide to vote in large numbers? Could the church not vote out the two parties presently who have this duopoly of the parliament? Sorry for the double barrel question.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, I will answer the first one easier. The second one, you asked to be a prophet. I'm not a Baptist minister. But the first one, the first part about the fear of the Black power, that certainly was there. But by the 1860s, that fear was manifest, not because of Baptist free villages, but because of, I mean, you can't say everything, but by the 1850s and 60s, the clear instance of others who mobilized Black support. The threat was imminent, but certainly by the middle 1850s, at least 15 or 20 members were in the assembly because of the support they got from Black small freehold voters, many of whom were not Baptists. The Baptists are not necessarily. I think of a parish like Portland. By the 1850s, the governor, in fact, described it as the Haiti of Jamaica. And he wasn't being complimentary. He says the estates are God and the Blacks control the politics in terms of the vesture and the voting. All right. That has nothing to do with the Baptists. Perhaps the Baptists to be concerned about, who they were concerned about in the 1860s was the native Baptists. George William Gordon has shown what was possible with political organization. And other native Baptists had spoken at on the Hill meetings across the island. That's not to say, by the way, that European Baptists like Houghton and Henderson may have lost faith. You had members of the Baptist Union, I think of two Black Baptists, Edwin Palmer in Kingston, who was harshly and viciously treated and locked up after Morant Bay, and Samuel Holt from Fitzfield in St. Elizabeth, who spoke at Underhill meetings and took very strong positions. So who knows, I can't tell you what they would have done, but the Underhill meeting may have had within it the seeds for realignment, which could have included Jamaica, members of the Jamaica Baptist Union. But if in 1865-66, the Black fear was very much there, there was a panic after Morant Bay, which Eyre manipulated to get what he wanted. The threat wasn't imminent, but there were increasing numbers of people, colored, Black, Jewish, and white representatives, whose return was more and more influenced by Black small freeholders. All right. The second part of the question, I know you asked me a question, I shouldn't give a lecture. The second part of the question about if the Baptists today could form, not the Baptists, the churches could form a party to collect that 60. I suspect, my friend, that you're going to find what the Baptists found out in 1844, that there are overarching connections which go beyond sectarian interests. So I'm not too sure if the way forward is to dip in that stream. Find a way somehow to clean the stream before you dip in it. Because I think sufficient of us have seen that people with the best intentions enter that stream to clean up the stream and the stream soils them. All right.
Thanks, Doc. John Mars, are you still ready to speak? If not, then Joan? All right, I'm not getting a response from Joan. Go ahead. Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry, I should have lowered my hand.
All right. So you don't wish to speak again?
Only to request that we could probably have these lectures a little more frequently.
Thank you so very much. We are encouraged.
Lectures, not the lecturer.
Lecturer, definitely lecturer. We're in agreement there, Sister Joan. Thank you. All right. Now, Dr. Kasafi, Anna Kasafi Perkins is making the observation that Caribbean theology should be public theology, part of which involves protest and advocacy on behalf of the vulnerable. But it appears that in today's Jamaica, and not necessarily Jamaica alone, but Caribbean, wherever we are of this kind of heritage, that the advocacy surrounds sexual and reproductive issues and gender issues, instead of the issues of landlessness, the unjust taxation, the decent wages, and so on. Your response, Dr. Wilmot.
I don't think those are issues to pick and choose between. The issues which confront us nationally. And perhaps, unless the question is asking, should churches be as vocal on issues which impact on the day-to-day quality of life of ordinary Jamaicans as they are on related issues which confront us today, gender, but those relate to local life as well. But I think perhaps the question seems to be suggesting, and it may have a foundation, that the churches, generally speaking, are selective in what they focus on.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the implication. Yes.
Yeah. Well, if they are in fact selective, there is a reason for that. I don't know the reason. I can't suggest the reason, but it's unfortunate. Because if Bob Stewart's view, and I'm very sorry, Bob died about 2 years ago, I'm sorry, he isn't with us now, but about a radical political theology, which identify their people's day-to-day struggles with their own religious survival. I mean, there's certain space for that and place for that. And given our national culture,
yeah,
right? I mean, other groups who are not in the traditional church unions or groups have been driven by radical theologies. The Rastafarians stand out, okay? And 50, 60 years ago, they kept that beacon of Black consciousness alive. Very important, all right? So, I mean, there is space for that. And there is certainly, what we're talking about really is, can the churches, say, there's another issue, you know, the church is segmented and divided too.
Thank you so very much for that. We have to get a couple more in, Doc.
Please.
There's a question coming, and it's twofold. It's coming from Mark Jennings on YouTube. Dr. Perkins asked something similar, so I'll pull them together. Is it now time for the churches to step up and debate, have a conversation, arriving at a position on land? And I dare need to add landlessness, given the church's ownership of large tracts of land, and even that challenge coming from Lions, that subdivision of abandoned estates should be done to allow persons to access lands. And of course, we're now looking at the Bernard Lodge, the Greater Bernard Lodge area. It's there right in our faces, and those who are regulars of these conversations would remember that we just completed another conversation on the free villages, where the question of lands came up again. Dr. Wilmot, what can you say to us?
Well, it's a past and Chris is speaking of us. They may have to start, the churches could start something based on the land they already have, okay? For their membership, who they can assist, okay? As the national debate, I think it should be welcome. The debate is not going to go away. It's not going to go away. But it's a real issue, okay? Have our human resources. How do we distribute our human resources in a just fashion? But that just fashion has to bear in mind people who already own land too.
Yes.
Okay? Because believe me, the capturing or the use of land in an unauthorized fashion is not only done in extensive areas of former estates, okay? Perhaps those areas have allowed Philistines to go and falsely sell people land they don't have to sell.
Yeah.
When I say Morant Bay, that first march of Bogle on the Saturday to the court was for his cousin Louis Miller, who was charged for trespass on Middleton on land which Miller thought he had bought, but not from the legal purchaser,
Wow.
not the legal owner. The legal owner was insisting on his rights, and people stood about, felt aggrieved because they had paid people for that land. And Nancy is not a new creation.
Thank you.
Okay, so the land issue has to be addressed. I think the church can offer its services for a national debate, because sadly, our partisanship and our party division is such now that conversation will last 5 minutes among our politicians. Sadly, okay? So this is probably a call for the churches, an opportunity to take a national issue,
yes,
and see if we can come with some sort of solution. It has implications, though, about their own use of the land they have.
Yes, correct. All right. In as much as we did not get a chance to go far, say up to 1962 and beyond, could you tell us, Dr. Wilmot, if there were any Baptist clergy active in the eastern end of the island?
Active when, sorry?
Active in politics in the eastern end of the island. We heard a lot about the strength of the West, and what about the East?
Well, outside of Kingston and St. David, which you call Yalas today, there are churches there. And there's also a church in Eastern St. Thomas beyond, Reverend Service was there. I think serviced out of Port Antonio. But in the area of St. Thomas, where the basis of rebellion was.
Yeah.
There were no Baptist ministers linked with the Jamaica Baptist Union. There were native Baptists, not just Bogle. There are other native Baptists in Morant Bay from the 1830s, 1840s. Okay. The Congregationalists had a minister in Morant Bay. The Wesleyans had, but neither the Presbyterians nor the Baptists had. Of course, the Anglicans had their parish church. But certainly there was a presence of a Baptist minister in the area around Manchonil to the north of Manchonil going towards Port Antonio. There was a in fact, initially he was also detained, but then released very, very, very quickly.
All right, thank you so very much for that. Now, we are hearing observations being made about, it's not surprising that the missionaries thought the Crown Colony was preferable, or there were persons recently out of slavery, and meant that many of them were ready and equipped to run the country. That is an observation from Nerissa Lawrence, just a comment that was left there. We're also hearing from Sister Eileen Garcia, who was mentioning that the Roman Catholics, they have been promoting action against climate change and its impact on the impoverished. So we're hearing how churches are involved. Sister Eileen, you still have your hand up? No, she has taken down her hand. We're looking in the comment section to give everyone a chance. Sister, is that? Oh yes, Sister Garcia, go ahead. Could you unmute Eileen Garcia for me, please, Mr. Moderator?
Hi, Dr. Wilmot. So thanks for the talk. Yes, this is not so much a question as a comment that not only do I see the churches involved with climate change, but in Canada, they've been significantly involved with land claims for Indigenous people and also advocating just to get their voices heard, giving a forum for those voices in the churches. So I think the justice idea is there and maybe just needs to be fanned more in Jamaica, because you have the liberation theologians who, I think it's there. It's the how to activate it. And I'm not sure if you have ideas how it could be activated, but I see globally that in fact the churches are trying to promote justice.
Well, let me declare interest here. I mean, it's the first time I'm hearing Eileen's voice in nearly 40 years, but
yeah.
So I know from my early days on campus when I had more hair of different color. The issue of climate change, Eileen, is very much alive here for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's an issue, and that's another national issue. You wonder which issue in Jamaica is that national now. But climate change and land, but all the use and also all the present use of land, especially in our urban settings, with the resurrection of concrete temples. How is that affecting the fallout about climate change and flooding? Is there a reason that, in fact, all the concreting, we are building catchment tanks without knowing it, which direct the water out into the roads for somewhere else? How are we going to deal with other issues? I listened to the news last night about challenge of garbage collection, sanitation, all part of our health and survival. Yet we have all these new areas of new, in other words, there needs to be some type of coordination. The idea of climate, well, thank God we are fortunate with Hurricane Ian, but there's a lesson there. And I hope, in other words, what the questions and suggestions seem to be is pointing to national issues which need address. In the 19th centuries initially, elements of the Baptist Church in their own way sought to address those issues, okay? It may have been easier to address them because they're also in self-interest. What was aligned was their own survival. if their membership had been oppressed, they could not support the churches, the mission would not survive. What we probably need is a broader national vision, of which clearly the present Baptists would be part of. But I mean, I think what the issues are raising, I came here as an innocent, quiet historian talking about the past, and I'm happy to come alive in the present. But I can't be everything. I can't be a historian, sociologist, economist, the wave of the magic wand. But I think it is here where people will listen. There is a need for a national conversation. And for that conversation to be credible, it has to be convened by people who are not linked to partisan practices. The rest are not going to listen who are not in your party. That's unfortunate. So we need a national presence. It may be a call again for the churches to step forward.
Thank you so very much for that, Dr. Wilmot. Just two final comments. Georgia Toloropa mentioned on YouTube, she was highlighting the link of slavery and the continued importation of basic food items into Jamaica. And I love that statement that was made, a call by Lions for cheaper food, not cheaper wages. But in this reality, the space that we're in, connected to the matter of land and getting people, the issues of larceny, just getting people to be interested in owning land, farming land, producing our own food. Is that something that you see any correction to without citing Morat Bay again?
I'm not sure of the thrust of your question. It is true that our present diet still reflects the enslaved diet.
Yes, and the continued importation of basic food items into Jamaica.
Well, the continued import of the basic food items continue because the demand for them. Okay, there's a demand for them. Is what our palates very early learn to eat and taste. I remember teaching at Monroe College in the middle 70s. Knowing people there who'd hear I was going to Kingston would bring a crocus bag of cabbage or tomato, give this away to your friends in Kingston. Okay, we have no food. But they wouldn't eat what they were growing. They were accustomed to the shortages. They were affected by the shortages of what was short. The flour and the rice and the salted things. Okay, while they were giving me food to give away to people which they had produced. All right. So it's a sort of reorienting of our taste. But it is not criminals who are importing what would that people who are making a living out of supplying a need, a demand. How do you educate people away from that? That's a challenge. There's one question or a comment somebody made earlier on which I didn't pick up on then, but I'd like to say no. When they say that Crown Colony government was welcome because the people are just out of slavery and didn't really have no, believe me, let me tell you something. Part of the challenge we need is, I don't know how you figured it out, okay? That the freed people who emerged in 1834 or 1838 had suffered and endured, but they had survived. They weren't destroyed, aimless victims. Moreover, the society had a sufficient middle class people, okay? People of various professions who could have provided leadership. George William Gaunt is not unusual. Edward Jordan, other people are not unusual. The simple point is there was a fear, an endemic, deep-seated fear of losing political power to people who were not planters and who were not white-looking. Right? I don't think that the electorate in Jamaica was no more uninformed than the electorate in England. Okay, people had their choices and they made them, and the people knew who were promoting their interests.
Yeah. All right, thank you so very much for that. We could go on, and we have been asked for a part 2, so we have got to ensure that we work on that. And Dr. Wilmot, you have heard it from the people. And so we'll be in conversation. Our able captain will, of course, make representation on our behalf, which I'm sure will be met with a yes. Right, sir? All right.
I hear you.
Rachel. Sorry. Let me just say this before we move on. Rachel is calling for us to re-energize the ecumenical movements, such as the Jamaica Council of Churches and the Caribbean Conference of Churches that were at the forefront of the struggle in the 70s and the 80s, which would answer Eileen's comment about liberation theology, which, of course, that's where Caribbean theology is situated. Caribbean theology is liberation theology. It's just that not enough persons are actually doing the theology. We're still talking and writing about it, but not really doing it. So we're hearing these calls from persons, and I believe that it's time for us to have that kind of recommitment. Having the conversations and moving to concrete actions would make a difference, I believe. So thank you so very much. And Rachel is Evie Vernon, Reverend Evie Vernon from the Anglican. Yes, Evie, Dr. Wilmot now realizes it's you. Yes.
Yes, she's my cousin.
She's this world small. All right, thank you so very much, cousins. Greeting, cousins. Wonderful. All right. Today's reading from the lectionary. One of the readings came from Jeremiah chapter 29. And in it, from verses 4 through to 7, there was the encouragement to the people that when you are in the land in which you were led into exile, you're to build houses, raise families, but most importantly, you're to seek the welfare of the city, because in the welfare of the city lies your welfare also. The New International Version puts it this way: also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. And I believe that the antidote to any kinds of prosperity that seeks to promote selfishness, self-centeredness, or soul self-interest and greedy profiteering, that's not true prosperity. The prosperity that seeks the welfare of all is what we are being called to as a people. That's our moral imperative. And so I trust that as we have listened this evening, we have also been challenged and stirred up, reignited to continue to advocate for those who are suffering from the gross injustices, not only here in Jamaica, but on a global scale. I want to say thanks to Dr. Wilmot for sharing with us in his usual, what our listeners call eloquent, informative, enlightening, energizing discourse. We thoroughly enjoyed it. And as I said myself personally, I just wanted a mug of tea to just drop a little bit closer and just sit down and take in some more of the conversation. So thank you, Doc. And we look forward to parts 2 and 3. Also want to say thanks to our guests. We could not have done this without you. And we are truly grateful for the way you support us in these conversations. And we hear your requests for us to have them more frequently so that we can really get into the meat of some of the topics, not just cut off at a point where we're left hanging, which is of course the best way to be cut off, so that you're longing for more and you'll be anxious to get more. And we're looking forward to that. Then we also want to say thanks to the members of the Historical Society led by our able captain, Mr. Jeremy Taylor, and those who supported from the office of the Jamaica Baptist Union, Mr. Onel Byfield. Then we have Sister Epi Edwards, who led us in the introduction of the speaker, Winsome Crombie, and Dale Samuels, and Mr. Taylor, who are manning the chats on Zoom and on YouTube. I am a member of the Historical Society, Marvia Laws, pastor of the Sligoville Circuit of Baptist Churches, and one who believes that we must not be quiet and we should not be silent in the face of injustice. We say, to God be the glory. Let us pray. And so, Lord, we thank you for how you have led us in this afternoon's reflection. Truly, we have learned a lot, but I doubt there is anyone here, Lord, who could say we have not been stirred up, we have not been challenged, we have not been led to reflect on the past so that we can understand where we are today and hear you calling us to walk with your people as you accompany us in spirit into a just future. We pray, Almighty God, that we'll make ourselves open to more than just hearing and learning, to become doers enabled by your spirit to build life-flourishing communities. May it be so, gracious God, and may you give us the courage so to respond. For these and other mercies we say thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you. Have a good evening and see you next time. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Sister Marvia.
Yes,
Hi, how are you?
I am fine.
This is Lena.
How are you doing?
I am giving God thanks.